we've decided to bring in remarkable voices each time we gather as a community of remarkables. And so the first remarkable voice we're bringing in is Zach, who's just arriving here, probably looking at all these beautiful women on the screen. And so our idea here is to bring in remarkable voices and start having remarkable voices to engage with as remarkable women. As we weather this pandemic, navigate it, and find our way through it to what will be birthed out of this birth canal that we're all in as a human family. And Zach is our first special superstar guest. And I'm going to give him a chance to, I'm just going to pose a question to him, but I think you all know who he is because you've seen his videos. We sent them to you. He's a physician. He's also an incredible thought leader. He's an environmentalist. He's working with the biome, at which he if you read about him, you can't believe how many degrees he has and how many things he's got going. And many of us are taking his health program. And he's a great ally to, particularly to transformation and to the emergence of the feminine, the divine feminine, the voices of not just women, but the feminine energy that's coming through right now that we call the Sophia Century. And so hi Zach, thank you for joining us. These are the Remarkables, we call them the Remarkables, and each one of these women is a whole story. And I know you would love to know each one of them. You know some of them, you know Tiffany, you know Cheryl, you know a lot of them. But what I'll say is that this program that we're doing, the Remarkable Women's Journey, actually is for women that are already extremely remarkable, which is everybody you see here on the screen, and to give them the opportunity to work together and with those of us who lead the program to find their rightful role in a culture that's hungry for the feminine, hungry for the divine feminine, hungry for the kind of leadership and energy that women provide that we call the first few years of what we call the Sophia Century. And particularly useful for us right now would be to have you talk, say anything you want actually, but how women, especially remarkable women leaders like the ones on the screen here, and the access we have as women to help guide society, civilization through and out of this pandemic in a way that we end up with the world we want, that's not based in the patriarchy with the dominant culture, but a culture that's more open, a culture that's more allowing, a culture that's more loving, a culture that's more fair and just and ecologically sound, which is what we're all committed to, and I know you are too. So anything you'd like to say to us, we would love to hear it. And thank you so much for joining us today. So
first, I'd like to just say thank you, Lynn, and thank you, Sarah, and the whole team at Soul of Money and your extended family at Pachamama and everything else. And what an extraordinary group of human beings, and particularly women, to be blessed with right now. And it's easily the most nerve-wracking question I've ever been asked. To these 30 goddesses, will you please explain the feminine archetype in your perspective and how it's going to take over the world? That is an awesome moment. And for me, the feminine archetype came into my life in 2010, just a decade back, almost to the day, actually. It was in February of 2010 when my whole previous world of academic medicine and cancer research started to really unravel in a massive way. And in the following months, I was now would call it a vision or a download or whatever, you know, verbiage you put to it. But I saw kind of where my career was going to shift massively, and all these companies and organizations that I would start. And at the time, it seemed just like, you know, a waking dream or something like that. I didn't think it was reality. I didn't think it was something that was actually going to come to fruition. And then the coming months, all of the doors that I thought were screaming open to me, and my life was so planned out, and my career was so on trajectory, they all slammed shut, and the universe really forced me into this waking dream, and that became my reality today. But the first step of it was to start a little clinic in rural Virginia, in a town of 550 people and kind of 5th generation poverty. And I didn't have much money. I cashed in my little 401k from my terribly paid university position and started this little clinic. Was on course to run out of money in 6 weeks of starting the clinic. And a woman walked into my clinic and said, "What are you up to?" And she was dressed to the nines, which is atypical in rural Virginia, and looked like she just walked off the streets of Brooklyn or New York or something. And I said, "Well, I'm planning to take over healthcare and create a whole new vision for how health should be delivered in the world." And she's looking around this renovated plumbing building that I'd renovated with my son. And she's like, "Well, that sounds like a pretty big goal. And it sounds like you're going to need more money than you have right now." And I said, "That's really true." And she said, "Well, I'll help you get some money if you'll promise to make all of your companies subsequently built in line with the feminine archetype." And I paused for a moment. I said, "I'll absolutely do that." And I had absolutely no idea what the feminine archetype meant, but I definitely needed the money. And it sounded interesting. It sounded like something I had never heard before, for sure. And so I went home that night and just typed into Google feminine archetype, and totally blew my mind and reshaped my world, and really maybe see the last 17 years of my academic career in light of a goal-oriented masculine archetype that had destroyed me, that had worn me so into the ground, that had given me a sense of hopelessness, had given me a sense of devalued self-worth, that it had in subtle ways really taken me down. And so the last 10 years, it's been a steady effort to break myself out of the masculine archetype and move into a feminine archetype. And in a nutshell, and many of you have been on that journey, and you wouldn't be doing, it sounds like many of you, the bios you have are extraordinary. And I see two parts of your bios for many of you. So I think you went through similar deconstruction, reconstruction moments. And for many of you, you rose to the top of a masculine archetype society in your jobs and in your things. And then you shifted, and now you're doing your soul effort, your soul mission in your own archetype. And you're defining a new normal for the world in doing that. And the more I study microbiology, I realize that nature is designed in a feminine archetype, which is not goal-oriented in the masculine type, but it's process-oriented. And so when you build a process, there's an unlimited amount of flow that can go through the process. When you make a goal, there's a very finite experience that can be had there. There's a very finite outcome. When we build our self-worth and our self-identity on finite, goal-oriented things, we limit the amount of flow that can happen through us. And so my excitement about microbiology and human biology, ultimately as an extension of that, is we are built as vessels of flow. And this happens down at the fundamental level of the cells and in the way in which we produce energy. And when I say we produce energy, it's not us as a human being, it's actually the microbiome. And so bacteria and fungi have to produce an enormous amount of bionutrient out of soil and put that into a plant. And the plant could be consumed by an animal, and the animal would then carry that energy forward to us. Or if you're on a plant-based diet, you're getting it right from the plant source of the microbiome. But you still cannot use that plant or animal as fuel, and you have to refeed that to your microbiome, which is now going to convert that into smaller parts and bioavailable nutrients that the human body can start to manage. And then it has to travel through the liver and be repackaged in such a way that it can get into the cells through the vascular system. And once it reaches a cell, it is still in the form of glucose, galactose, 2 carbohydrates, or fatty acids. Those are the only fuels that the body can use. Still useless to the human cell. The only thing within the human cell that can consume glucose and fatty acids is actually the mitochondria, which are weird little species that are only carried by the mother. And I get very intrigued about this again. We are literally fueled by a species of microbiology, these 3 little species of mitochondria that live within our cells that are only inherited through the maternal line. there's some deep spiritual and, physiologic importance to that has never really been teased out or explored to its due potential. But I get super excited about the concept that the male contribution to life, the sperm, has no mitochondria in it. It actually has no way to produce energy in the sense of a human cell. And so it functions much more like a bacteria. So in a bizarre way, pregnancy is like your first infection. And so you got this bacteria that inserts a little bit of genetic information into the ovum. And the ovum is filled with mitochondria, 3 species of these extraordinary mitochondria, at least 200, but probably closer to 2,000 mitochondria in an ovum. And those mitochondria are the most extraordinary energy producers that we've ever encountered. That ovum will then start to divide, and initially it looks like a tumor. Every single cell is identical to the previous, just like a cancer cell. The difference between that and a cancer cell is that there's no genetic injury, you hope, which a cancer cell does have. But the other thing is that once it gets to its 280th cell division, and so now it looks like a snowball under the microscope, it suddenly changes, and it looks like it gets a big indentation on one side. And in that moment, differentiation happens. And so bizarrely, we know at which point human cells reach quorum sensing. Quorum sensing is a hyperintelligence when you get bacteria or fungi or other organisms into a big enough community where they start to develop a hyper intelligence due to a larger sense of self-identity, due to connectivity and community. And so we know that somewhere around 280 human cells becomes a hyperintelligence. And in that moment, hyperintelligence is based on the realization of unique identities within the whole. And I find that fascinating. Again, the maternal force here, fueled by maternally driven energy source of the mitochondria, is producing enough communication, because the mitochondria does that. Not only are they producing the energy, they produce the communication network within the cell. That baby now, as it comes through the vaginal canal, goes through the second conception, as I see it. The second conception is an adoption of the entire microbiome of the mom's vaginal canal. And in this, it reaches an extraordinary capacity for resilience and immunity within the greater nature. The child itself actually does not have an immune system until 6 months of age. And yet at 7 days of age, we know that there's 10 to the 8th viruses in the stool of that child, and no sickness. In fact, the higher the virus count, the healthier the child is. We have the wrong perspective on viruses. They actually are a genetic transfer mechanism to bring enough genomic information into the child's experience that it knows its self-identity within the larger nature now. And so in an extraordinary way, what we face today is not a fearful event of a pandemic. And I'm putting together a 2-hour literal movie on, the real science behind the pandemic right now. And even for me, it's been mind-bending. It's been, I say even for me, not because I'm intelligent, but because I've spent the last 20 years thinking about this stuff. And even now, as I dive into the new science that's emerging and the public health numbers that, the CDC is not telling everybody, but has published on their website, we are not being told the truth about viruses, about HIV, about Hep C. None of these are real phenomenon in the sense of a germ. They don't function as bacteria. They are genetic updates to our genome. And we now know that over 50% of the human DNA, which is a very small amount, only 20,000 genes within the human genome, which is small compared to a flea that has 30,000 genes. So you're 2/3 as complicated as a flea at the genetic level, but you carry 50% of that DNA as viral information that updated the human genome over the last, hundreds of millions of years. Even before we would consider ourselves Homo sapiens, we were receiving the updates of the virus. And some incredible new data is showing that we can't have pluripotent stem cells without the viral genome within our DNA. We could never be a regenerative being without viral information from a reverse transcriptase RNA, which is the same as HIV. Without that, we would not be who we are. This virus going around has not increased. In fact, it's decreased the amount of respiratory death on the planet this year. That's not being talked about because it's so confusing. How could this virus be updating the human genome such that there would actually be a decline in respiratory death? I believe that every virus is an opportunity for an update. And when I get sick, I see it now over the last 10 years. Every time I'll get sick, whether it's just a common cold or a febrile event, I know I'm getting new data. And so I'll go into a deep rest and a meditative experience and asking my body, why did you need this fever? Because we now know that fever is one of the best ways to kill cancer within our bodies. Why did you need new data? What am I preparing myself for with the new genetic update? The people that are passing away, one of my specialties in hospice medicine, and I know that death is a lie. I know that death is not a fear state. We should never fear death. 100% of us will die. It is not something to be feared. It is the most beautiful. It's just the third conception. It is the rebirth that we are preparing ourselves for. And so if this virus updates your genome and the choice of the body is then to let go of the body and the spirit to rise, should we call that a fear paradigm? Should we turn that into a multi-billion-dollar vaccine program or something like that? We have the wrong paradigm, let alone wrong science. We are looking at this equation completely erroneously because we are so masculine archetyped out. It is all goal, 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 and failure, goal, failure, success, failure, goal, success, fail. And we look at the world that way, forgetting that we are simply vessels of flow. And I want to close this out with mitochondria again, because I began life discussing these weird little species that are within us. And they create energy, but they don't create it just as ATP, which is one of the fuel they kick out at the end that helps some of our enzymes work and things like that. The primary thing, and this really is your take-home message, the primary thing that mitochondria make is light energy. And passing that light energy from cell to cell is a system of fiber optic cables to the tune of hundreds of thousands of fiber optic cables between each cell. And at the end of each of these microscopic fiber optic cables, and if you just Google gap junction, GAP junction, and electron microscope, and you're going to see something that looks like a cable with thousands of little strands in it. And then it'll go to a higher resolution. And you're going to realize every tiny little strand is actually a perfect hollow tube that's hundreds of times smaller than a human hair. Perfect molecular tube. And at the end of that is an aperture, just as you would see on a camera lens that lets light in and out. And so we have thousands of fiber optic cables that can tune the amount of light that passes from one cell to the next. And the light that it's passing is produced by 3 species of mitochondria that are passed on through the feminine line. And then we flow that energy through our bodies and we call that life. When you see life pass from a body, that body becomes inanimate immediately. And it's so impossible to figure out what you're experiencing when you know that body is dead. But you don't have to take a pulse. Like you do this as a doctor, you walk into the ICU and nurse says you need you to proclaim the death and blah, blah, blah. So you go through the steps, you put your stethoscope on the chest, but you know the second you walk into that room that that patient is dead. You cannot visually tell the difference though. They might be a little bit paler, but in the ICU, we are used to seeing almost dead people all the time. So visually, there's no really remarkable difference. But there's an energetic experience of knowing when a life is animated with that light energy and when it is not. We have forgotten how to see light energy, perhaps, but we can feel it. And so in the feeling of light energy, we approach the ability to be in flow, to witness flow. And this is why I start every clinic visit and every encounter on stage or wherever I am with a hug. Because in a hug, I can scan the body of that person and instantly know, are they heart open? Are they carrying an enormous amount of stress and conflict in their belly? Because I can feel that in my body. I have a huge antenna to come close to that person and experience. And so I want you guys to think about what this isolation event has meant for humankind. There is a mindset, there is a philosophy of fear that has decided that the best way to control human beings is to separate us. And they are exactly right. In our separation, we lose the connectivity, the hyperintelligence. And what gives me great joy, and which makes me think that we do not want a revolution to overcome our current situation, is that people are connecting through new and novel ways, and the reverse to maybe perhaps the control effort has happened, as we have sparked a new sense of autonomy, a new sense of connectivity, a new sense of purpose is emerging. This Sophia century is well afoot. We are 2 decades in, and I see the feminine archetype rising. I see process rather than goal happening, and you all are mavens within that environment. You all are beginning to define a new normal that desperately needs to be defined.
Wow. Wow. I'm so glad we recorded this. So, first of all, Zach, thank you so much. And I know that that there are very few people on earth with your scientific training that have gone to the depths of understanding all the terms that you use, and the rigor and granularity with which you're doing your research, who have the heart and the spiritual lens that is so critical to see what's actually really going on here. So anyway, it's very moving to hear you speak, as always. So I want to give our Remarkables a chance to ask you questions or respond in any way while we have you for the next 10 minutes or probably less.
Whatever you need.
If you want to raise your hand or just wave at me, or you can raise the hand on the, the Zoom feature, if you know that Zoom feature. Is there anyone who would like to or respond to what you've just heard? Please let me know so I can call on you. Z Woodman. Go ahead, Z.
Thank you so much. I feel like every hair in my body and every, everything kind of got electrified with what you were sharing. And I just want to know how to find out more. Where do I go, and what do you recommend in terms of how to get deeper into what this is that's so electrifying?
I think step one is go within yourself. As you digest this information, the reason you feel electrified is you already knew all of this, and there's a deep, connectedness to this knowledge. None of this came from a degree. This is human wisdom, and the connection of all of us right now, even though we are in far-flung areas of the world, we are connecting at a vibrational level. And so you are feeling my vibration, I am feeling your vibration. And in that, you are creating a hyper intelligence in me, and you are receiving back your own intelligence in that. And so I've spoken about the feminine archetype many times here and there, but I've never delivered it like I just did, because what I just said wasn't a prepared talk. I thought that Lynn was actually going to interview me, but she instead said, you can say whatever you want. And I didn't know what I wanted to say until I started talking, and let you all express through me what it is you want to hear. The reason you're electrified by me is you manifested what you wanted to hear today. And I am a vessel that is flowing information through it that doesn't come from me. And so in a beautiful way, I want you to know that I don't believe that I'm any source for you. I believe that I am a vessel. I'm a pipeline. I am also in my highest state, function as a mirror, and I can shine back the light that you produce. And you are just the brightest being. To give you a sense, and I've got Z Woodman. What is Z? What you go by, or do you have a first name there?
Z.
That's your name.
I love Z.
Z, yeah.
I can relate to that. My dad would call me Dr. Z because I was a little basketball team. I was terrible at basketball, but Dr. J was like the man back then, and so everybody on the team decided they were going to be Dr. their first letter. So I was Dr. Z for a long time, and I was going to be a mechanic, not a doctor. But at any rate, eventually Dr. Z became real. So Z, I want to give you a sense of how bright you shine, in that those mitochondria that we were just speaking of, and you have 200 per human cell, and in your neurons you have 2,000 per neuron. And so you've got this massive population in your body right now. You look like you're about 20 or something like that. And so we'll say like you're you've probably got around 14 quadrillion mitochondria. They decline as we age, as we poison them through just our presence on the toxic planet right now. But at youth, we're maybe at 20 quadrillion, and then they decline. But sometime in your few decades, you're in that 10 to 20 quadrillion mitochondria. And they literally pack every cell. And so a biology textbooks, all of them are wrong, because they always show you like there's 2 or 3 mitochondria floating in there. The only reason they depict that is because they can't draw all the mitochondria, because you couldn't see anything else in the human cell. And so you are packed solid with mitochondria. And so by volume, you can imagine your body full. You know, if you could just do X-ray vision, you would just see all these mitochondria, not human cells. And cubic centimeter of mitochondria produces 10,000 times more energy than a cubic centimeter of the surface of the sun.
Really?
And so, Z, you are literally a star, and you are glowing 10,000 times brighter than our sun in a vibration that we can't visually see, but we can feel. And so what lights your skin up and raises the hair follicles on your arms and makes you feel electrified is your own light energy. You are giving yourself access to your own power in being given the opportunity to take the blinders off and to see how powerful you are. Each of you could transform human consciousness as a singular light being if you really could unsheath all of it. And I think that there's some beauty that we aren't supposed to do that in unison or in our loneliness, but we are supposed to do that as a community. Mm-hmm. And so the fact that you women are connecting and spending these weeks together and learning to show each other the light that you each shine and be a reflection back at one another, you will shift the society we live in. We do not need a revelation. We do not need a revolution. We really need a metamorphosis. We need a fundamental transformation of the way in which we design societies and sociopolitical systems, monetary systems, and the rest. And so Soul of Money, I really believe, sits at one of the core fundamental truths that has to be reborn. We need to rebirth the concept of value. And each of you are the gold bank. Each of you are literally the most valuable resource on the planet. The feminine has to rise. And if it doesn't, we will go extinct over the next 80 to 100 years. The science is very, very clear on our timeline. We've got 80 to 100 years, best case scenario. Worst case scenario, we have 8 to 15 years, which is a very, very short amount of time for metamorphosis to happen. And I don't even fear that, because I know we could do it instantaneously. We could do it tomorrow. And I believe that moment of metamorphosis is coming. And the fact that you are all together doing your journey right now is symptomatic of the coming metamorphosis. And so I hero all of you. I am so blessed to be in your light.
Holy moly. Okay. Wow, Zach. I know Zach needs to leave us now and go on to inspire some other group of amazing people. But Zach, thank you not only for your presence with us, but your presence in the world at this time. As a scientist, as a spiritual teacher, as a deep listener, as a student of life, someone who is hospicing the natural death of the structures and systems and ideas and misunderstandings that no longer serve us, and midwifing the birth of the new ways of seeing that will give us the sustainable, profoundly deep human family that we know we already are, that wants to fully manifest. So God bless you. Thank you so much. I know everybody would love to have you stay with us for hours, days, weeks, and we'll have you back soon. And God bless you, and go on to continue your amazing work. And thank you for being with us.
Thank you all so much for being who you are and being on your journey and pushing the envelope for us all. Much love.
Take care.